A pleasure. I was asked to speak on male-female relations, and I will do that, as well as deal with some other issues related to the survival and the advancement of the black community. I'd like also to invite you down in about 2 weeks to our new location. As the introducer indicated here, I am part owner of the Harlem Graphics Arts Center, a print center, copy center, center. We'll have quite a collection of books, both Afrocentric books and other general books. We are right at 125th Street, 5th Street near 7th Avenue. I was right down the street from the Apollo Theater on the same side. I'd like to see you come down. We are trying there not only to build a business, but to build an institution to serve as an example for the youth and others and adults of what can be done if black people work together. We recognize that it's necessary for us to build an economy to provide jobs for ourselves and for our children, and this is our first step in doing that. We recognize that we must get access to our own monies and use those monies to our advantage as people. And that's what Harlem Graphic Arts is about. We will also give courses there that will provide education that is relevant to the black community as well. So I hope when you're down in that part of the woods, you'll come by and see us. We'll be happy to see you. Now, we're going to talk a bit about man-woman relations. The thing that we have to recognize, of course, is that the relationship between men and women, or between a man and a woman, is not an isolated situation. That the way you love one another, the way you love your girlfriends, your boyfriends, your husbands, your wives, your children, is rooted in a political, social system. Love, just does not flow out of your heart. You know, and it's just not natural like we tend to think of it as being. It is influenced by your own experience as an individual, as well as by your experience as a people. One of the reasons why I wrote the book, The Developmental Psychology of the Black Child, is the fact that I wanted to bring to people's attention that you just couldn't read a standard book on developmental psychology and apply what was found in that book to the black child. Because black people have a unique history. It is the history of the black child is not the history of the white child. The history of the black parent is not the history of the white parent. The political, social position that black people are in this country is not the political, social position of whites. The psychology of black people flows from the history and experience of black people. If you went into a psychologist's office, he would want, or she would want, to know your own personal history, because it is only through understanding your personal history as an individual that your behavior can be understood. A psychologist or psychiatrist could not take the history of another individual and just apply it to you and say, well, I know this other person very well, so therefore you must behave this way too. And the values they have and the ideas they have must be the same you have. The only difference between you and this other person is that they have a different color from you. That is not the way psychology is built, ladies and gentlemen. You can only be understood as an individual in terms of your own history and experience. When we talk about then the psychology of black people, we must understand that psychology in terms of the experience of our people. You cannot go and get a psychology from another people whose history and experience has been different and just impose it upon yourself. You will create problems. And therefore, I looked at the history and experience of black people and talked about psychology in those terms. We must talk about education in those terms, business in those terms, and anything else that is relevant to us in those terms. We must recognize that the love relationship between the black mother and her child, between the black father and his child, between the mother and the fathers and the sisters and the brothers in the black family is shaped by the political, social situation in which we as people live. And that has to be taken into consideration. So love, you see, under those circumstances, does not just flow up out of the heart. It's influenced by social political circumstances. If there was a difference in the family in terms of who was the darker or who was the lighter or who had the good hair or who had the bad hair, that means that racism in the political social system has entered into the parent. And the parent then transfers that racism, even in the way he or she relates to the children, onto the child, and creates in that child then an attitude toward itself and toward the world that flows from being in a particular social political position. You see, then, when the white psychologist talks about the parent and the child, they can talk as if it is the relationship between the parent and the child that makes the child what it is. However, when we talk about the black parent and the black child, we must talk about that black parent's relationship to the white world, that black parent's political position in the world. How black people have been dealt with in this society must be considered. And all of these things influence, to a good extent, how that black parent is going to relate to his or her child, what they're going to say to their children, how they're going to prepare their children for life, how they are going to express their love or not love toward their children. So then you must understand then that love, what we call love, is shaped, created, and maintained by social political systems. Therefore, as you will see when we go through this lecture, you must see how then your social life and existence itself is going to influence the way you relate to your husbands, to your wives, to your boyfriends, to your sisters, and to your brothers. I want to talk a moment or two in terms of what we call the relationship between love and community. I want us to understand that love between a man and a woman, or between a parent and a child, thank you very much, is ultimately a gift to the community itself. Thank you, kindly. I have emphasized before that when you have a child, you just don't have a child for yourself. The child just does not belong to you as a mother or as a father. A child is born into a community of people. The child is a gift to the community because the child is not going to live in a world by itself. It's going to live in a community where it relates to other peoples. Its behavior is going to influence other people in the community. If it turns out to be a delinquent or crime-oriented, it's going to negatively affect the lives of other people. The community has to share in educating that child. The community has to share in supporting that child, feeding that child, providing jobs for that child, providing protection for that child. The community, if the child does not turn out well, has to provide rehabilitative services and supportive services and other kinds of services for that child. So then when a child is born, it is not only the responsibility of the parents who gave it birth, but it is also a community responsibility. And so consequently, when one has children, one must not only think in terms of how the child is going to relate purely to the mother or the father that gave it birth, but also how it is going to relate to the people itself. A child must ultimately grow up to contribute to the community's ability to support it and to support its family, to protect its interest. because it is only with the community's support that the family and the child itself continues to survive. So we must keep in mind then that children are ultimately born to the community because they will influence the nature of the community. If the children that are born in a community are self-hating, as we will talk later on, or have problems with their identity, or self-control, or destructive and so forth, you will see a community that will fall apart, a community that is at odds with itself, a community that is divided, a community that by its very nature will continue to destroy other children and other people. The greatest gift that a parent can give to a community is the gift of beautiful, healthy children, well-behaved children, children who know themselves, who have a firm identity, and so forth, children who are able to love healthily and love in a righteous type of manner. So in a sense, you may not be great, or you may not be famous, or you whatever, but we all have the potential of being good parents. And that is a major contribution to the advancement of a community and to its survival. I say that also to say that love is a gift to the community as well. How well you love yourself as an individual. The sins of the first generation are visited now until the 14th generation. Often it will take sometimes 3 and 4 or more generations for a family to live out the hate between a mother and a father. The children get it, their children get it, their children's children get it, and it can go right on before it's finally worked through. The children's reactions to poor love relations between mothers and fathers can lead to their own personal problems, their own interpersonal problems with other people as well. Those problems sweep out into the community. Children suffering from a feeling of a lack of love from their own parents may then deal with that by becoming delinquent in their behavior, by not reaching their own potentials, by not functioning in schools the way they should, by themselves getting into trouble, by themselves becoming impregnated at a too early age, and so forth. And this in itself affects community services, community resources, the kind of community that the individual lives in. So when we love as men and women, as sisters and brothers, this love also is rooted in community and is necessary for community functioning. Love, romantic love or whatever love, is not a selfish undertaking. And it should not be perceived as something just between you and your partner. It moves beyond that. It's going to influence more people than just you and your partner. It's going to influence the community itself. And consequently, then, the community has a right to concern itself with the so-called nature of love. Love, along with the related concepts, such as oneness, and we see people wanting to get a sense of oneness when they're in love, unity, uniting, being together, identity, identifying, becoming one with the person you love. It becomes interesting. We talk about love in terms of blood relations. And yet the person you marry is really not your blood relation in actuality. But yet somehow that love, if it's right, becomes as strong or sometimes even stronger than blood relations, you see. So because love tends, as we see it in this culture, to unite and bring about identity between two or more people that goes beyond their biological relatedness, that often is stronger than their biological relatedness. Love, along with commitment, caring and sharing, belonging, relatedness, commonality, that's having things in common, is that which creates a community, is that which supports a community and maintains a community. So then the thing that keeps a community together is, of course, the nature of love that inheres in its families and between its families. And ultimately, the nature of love that is put out toward the community itself and toward one's people. And all of this influences the nature of romantic love. When you want to destroy a community, when you want to destroy a people, as we will talk a bit about later on, you destroy the nature of their romantic love, destroy their ability to love one another in a healthy sort of way. And we will see. When you see and you think about the problems we have as people and as individuals in loving each other romantically, you must recognize in good part that problem and those problems have been set up by a political social system. Because we shall see that love, the love that we have for one another, is the greatest threat to the people who rule over us. And it is necessary for those people who rule over us and who rule over African people the world over, if those people are to stay in power, they must destroy our ability to love each other in a healthy sort of way. This is why, even if you're concerned with your individual love for your boyfriend or your husband, you cannot separate that love from what is going on in the world, politically and socially, because the nature of that love is defined by political, social circumstances. And if you can't understand why you have problems in your love relations, perhaps a good part of it is because you have not taken time to understand the nature of the political, social situation in which you live, because you have been made to think that your love is merely the concern of you and your partner and not rooted in what is going on in the world. Love is a part of the world you live in. The community ultimately defines love anyway. You see, many of us are raised in this culture, and we've been raised to think love is something just natural and just flows out of living. I'm speaking now particularly of romantic love. But actually, you have to learn how to love. Love is taught to you. You teenagers, you're being taught what love is. How are you taught that? You're taught it by listening to these records all the time. And you hear your idols singing about love. You make me feel so good. I can't eat. I can't sleep. I can't live without you. And then what do the people say? I must be in love. You see? And, I can't go on. Here's my heart. Don't break it. You see, my life has no meaning, and all of these kinds of things. And you read what? Poetry. And of course, many of you in this age now where you're writing from the city of love and from the street of this and so forth. I've forgotten my old rhymes when I was a kid. We all wrote those things. You look at TV and you see Dallas and you see Knots Landing and you see show after show after show. And you think you're just looking at entertainment, but actually they're teaching you what love is, or what love is about, how you're supposed to feel when you're in love, you see. If you feel this way, if you can't eat and you can't get him off your mind, if you dream about him all the time, if shivers run up your spine when you see him and all that, that means you're in love. In a sense, if there was no one around to tell you that, you wouldn't feel it. You wouldn't feel love. Now, romantic love, believe it or not, is only, in this culture, about 200 or 300 years old. Prior to, say, the 1700s, people didn't marry for love. In fact, they saw love, what we call love, as a terrible basis for marriage. They fought against it. They married in terms of maintaining family lines, in terms of maintaining property, in terms of maintaining political and other kinds of associations, class associations. Your husband might have been picked out for you at birth. You might not have even seen your husband until your wedding day. You would not have had anything to say about who your husband or your wife was. That would have been the result of negotiation between your parents, between your whole clan and your family. Because these families recognized that when marriage takes place between a man and a woman, the families are married as well. That you don't marry just an individual, you marry into a family, you see. And consequently, it was the family that came first in determining marriage and marital relations. Now, this sounds very harsh to us today because we've been brought up with this other concept of marriage, that is, you marry who you love. But we can trace the history of marriage based on romantic love. And it, to a great extent, was built on novels and poems, came out of the courts of Europe to a very great extent, which is the reason why we still use kind of the word courting. Many of those people had nothing to do all day but develop rules about how you used to court and how you deal with the man and a woman and so forth. And eventually that worked its way down into society. Poets started writing poems about love and emotion, and eventually the average person started picking it up. As the society changed toward industrialization and so forth, and as families began to break up, where aunts and uncles and 3 and 4 generations no longer lived in the same household, then people started making their own individual choices about who they would marry and so forth. And often those choices started being made in terms of emotions and feelings. We have found out in this culture, though, that merely marrying someone because you love them does not guarantee the unity of the marriage hardly any more than the other forms of marrying people as well. But the point then I'm trying to make here then is this, that even the community you live in defines what love is and teaches you to love in one way or the other. So even in that sense, love is community, and it is a part of community. To a good extent, some of the problems that we have in this country and in our communities is a result of the wrong definition of what love is, where the community has come to accept a concept of love that works against its interest. When people are getting married because they are in love, and yet half of those marriages are more fall apart, and the other half of those are living in conflict and hostility, then it must make you think that there is something wrong in the way we define love in this system and in our community. It means then there is a time perhaps for the community to redefine what love is and what love is about. It is in your interest as young people that the community teaches you a new form of romantic love and loving one another. Why? Because it will enhance your ability to stay with the man you love and to stay with the woman you love, to keep your children with you in your family, to develop healthy people and to develop a healthy community. So your interest, even as young people, should be in how your community defines what love is. Not only should you listen to these records or just dance to these records, you should take out some time and think about what kind of love is this record projecting? Is this a kind of love that is ultimately going to be productive for me and my boyfriend, for me and my husband, for me and my children? And you may find that some of these records you're listening to are really not in your best interest. While they're making you feel good and they're good for the party, when you look down the road, the way they're defining love and how a man should relate to a woman may ultimately destroy you and destroy your love relationship, the one that you want to keep so much. So then there is a very definite relationship between love and community. And the community itself has a very deep and abiding interest in what love is and how love should be defined and expressed. I want to indicate here then some things about the consequences of what we call the love instinct. Freud has a very interesting theory of what he calls the id. We won't go into detail there, but however, he sees the id as containing 2 major instincts, along with others. A love instinct, what he calls sometimes eros, and a death instinct, you see. And we'll see in a minute what he meant by that death instinct. And it's a very paradoxical kind of theory once you think of it, particularly about the death instinct, the idea that people also have an instinct that moves them toward death as well. But when you get a little chance for some heavy thinking, I think you might see it's not as paradoxical as it sounds. In a sense, we are born to die, and in a sense, we die from living. So death is almost a side effect of living. So they are kind of intrinsically related, one to the other. But love, let's look at the love instinct and how that instinct is expressed. Certainly, it's expressed sexually, and certainly it's expressed in terms of reproduction. So love and sexuality are closely related because they lead to the maintenance of the species and the reproduction of the species. Love involves the preservation of oneself. If you love yourself, you love your body, you love who you are, you love your family, you love your man, you love your woman, you love your community, you want to preserve those things. You want to see them grow and develop. And this is, of course, what the love instinct does. It not only, though, preserves the self, it preserves others. You want to preserve the people that you love. The love instinct expresses itself in procreation, in the giving of birth, in reproducing. This is how, of course, we maintain the life of the group itself. Love also is involved in growth, because life is about growth. It is about development. It is about transcendence. It is about enhancement. It is about fulfilling one's potential. The child, the little baby, is filled with potential. It is born a few inches long, but it has the potential to grow feet long, you see. It's born then at a certain level of mental activity, and yet there's a potential of great intellectual growth, social growth, psychological growth, and all types of growth. Love will permit this potential to express itself, to actualize itself. So you can see love is an enhancing element, a growth element, a developing element. Love then that exists in a community is the element that makes that community grow and develop and fulfill its potential. When a community is shrinking and falling into destruction, you can bet there is an absence of the right kind of love in that community. When it is falling in upon itself and the people are killing one another, hurting one another, or destroying one another, you can bet it is because the love instinct there has been misdirected or is not functioning in the way it should function. Love, of course, is geared towards survival, protection, and liberation, freeing people instead of restricting them. It moves toward discovery, goodness, and healing. Love is reconstructive. It repairs the individual. It rebuilds the individual and stimulates growth and development. Love is elation. I'm sure this is the side of love we hear most about, isn't it? Elation, euphoria, feeling good. Love has its own natural high, its own euphoria. When you're loved by your family, you love, and when you love your family, when your family has permitted you to grow and develop and fulfill your potential, when your community is concerned and cares about you and shares with you and you do the same with it, when you can sit down and not be afraid to walk the streets of your community, not be afraid to speak and say hello to people on the streets of your community, when you can have a decent conversation without feeling you have to manipulate someone or someone manipulates you, there is a beauty and there is a euphoria about that kind of feeling. There is a tendency to smile and a tendency to be happy and a tendency to be free and a tendency to be honest and open. This is what love does when it operates well within a community itself. It takes you beyond yourself. That is, it is what we call transcends. It moves out beyond. You glow. and people pick up your glow. Your love becomes infectious, and people reflect it back on you, and you reflect it back on them. And therefore, you feel good. It feels wonderful to dance and to sing and to be even a little silly sometimes and to joke with them sometimes and to play with people that you love. And it just makes you glow with health and glow with happiness, and it's a beautiful kind of thing, and you naturally want to stay with your people. You naturally want to be around your community. You naturally want to be a part of its movement forward and so forth. So love has in it a built-in beauty and glory, a built-in euphoria. We're going to see then that love can develop from love. I think Whitney Houston has a song out now. What's the title of it, the current one? I know you know it's very popular. Pardon me? The Greatest Love of All. And part of it is said, she found her love when she found what? She found herself, and she found her love in herself. You cannot love, as we shall see in a moment, others without self-love. You cannot be filled with hatred and hostility toward yourself and love somebody else in a healthy manner. You can only get to know other people through knowing yourself. It is through the self that you reach others. You will only, though, get to know yourself if you're surrounded by people who love you and love you in a healthy sort of way. As we shall see, when you're around people who don't love you in a healthy sort of way, you're going to hide parts of yourself from yourself. You're going to become blind to parts of yourself. You're going to be caught up in the emotions of hatred and hostility and revenge and resentment, and your energy and your attention is going to be caught up in those nasty emotions, and you're going to be a nasty person as a result thereof. And as I'll show you in a minute, you're going to be able to love. You're going to be able to, with all of this nastiness, because nasty people do fall in love. Okay? Hateful people fall in love. And we'll see. But we'll see in a minute, it's going to be a peculiar kind of love. It's going to be a love, ultimately, though, that's going to destroy them and the people they love. Many people, I would say a large percentage of children and wives and husbands are destroyed in the name of love. I'm doing this to you because I what? Love you. And yet when you look at what's being done, it's often projecting hate, but hate covered with a veneer of love. So then love that comes from love permits the self and other people to develop. Love that comes from love is liberating. Love that comes from love permits other people to develop their potential. We will see later on that love that comes from hate is love that's destructive, is love that restricts, is love that's possessive, is love that makes the other person a servant of oneself, is love that ultimately degrades other individuals. You see, so in a family, a child has to be raised with love and in a loving sort of way, so that when it loves, it then will create more lovely people and lovely children. Let's look a moment then at the hate instinct. We talked about the love instinct or the life instinct, and now let's look at the death instinct. And there is a death instinct within us. Freud talks about it as saying in man there's an inherent need or desire for him to return to his origins. We, of course, are people, our bodies are made of the earth. Some of you, of course, are familiar with the Bible verse, dust thou art, and to dust thou shalt return. And so he builds his philosophy to a degree by saying then, ultimately, the end point of life is a returning back to the earth itself. And of course, there are philosophical issues that this implies. But I think what is more interesting is how the death instinct is expressed. We saw earlier that the love instinct is expressed in many different ways. So is the death instinct. Let's look at some of the consequences. The death instinct expresses itself in terms of hate. That's an expression of death. When you hate somebody, you also often want to do what? You want to kill them. You want to destroy them, hurt them, make them feel pain. So death comes through you onto the other individual. You see, resentment is an expression of the death instinct. Hostility, hostile aggression, retarding other people's growth and development, what we call disenhancement. Just as love leads to enhancement, hatred leads to disenhancement, disenchantment. Just as love leads to harmony, hatred leads to disharmony. Just as love then leads to growth by the person you're dealing with, hate leads to restriction, holding them back. We, of course, as people have been the victim of hatred. And hatred has locked us into ghettos and locked us into poor schooling and locked us into all kinds of corners and ghettos of all types. Hatred then brings about ultimately the death and destruction of other people. We must recognize that the world is a perfect place. And I've often said, though, that means you don't confuse perfection with good. I didn't say it was necessarily a good place. Perfection and goodness are not one and the same thing. You can be perfectly evil as well as perfectly good. Perfection has to do with the precision of a thing, the precision of relations, the lawfulness between a cause and an effect. It talks about then, when you talk about perfection, you're saying surely this thing is always followed by that thing. Now, then the point I'm trying to get at here then is this. If you have hate in your heart, if you have resentment in your heart, if you have anger and fear in your heart and hostility in your heart, the law of perfection says you are going to create a world that is destructive. You cannot have these emotions in yourself and not produce a destructive kind of world. This, of course, was what Jesus was talking about when he talked about the gospel. Gospel implying what? Good news. When he talks about love thy neighbor as thyself. Greet your enemy with what? Love. Because it is love what? God before all else. Be filled with the love of God. And to be filled with God is to be filled with love. And therefore, a nation of godly people is not a nation that is racist, is not a nation that kills and destroys the earth and kills and destroys its people. You cannot have war, death, and destruction where true and righteous love exists between people. And what Christ was trying to get at then was this. If we could come to love others as we love ourselves, if we could come, and notice it says, as ourselves, which means we love ourselves as well, and it is through the process of loving oneself deeply that we love other people deeply as well. Out of that then becomes a world filled with love, and the kingdom of God comes to earth itself. In a world, though, filled with hate and resentment and anger, you're going to get a world then filled with war, murder, death, suicide, robbery, rape, violence, and all the kinds of things we see so much about in the everyday news. This is one of the reasons why you know that this nation is not a Christian nation. You got people who go to church. The Christian so-called religion is the predominant religion, but the people are not filled with Christianity by any stretch of the imagination, ladies and gentlemen. If this country was a true Christian country, we wouldn't even be here talking about black men and black women love and all that kind of thing, would we? We wouldn't even be talking about our problems as a what? As a race and as a people. Because that kind of problem would not exist with people who truly love and had the love of God within them. But it is because we don't have that love that we have the kinds of problems we have today. This is why ultimately Jesus and the other prophets can predict the end of the world as being one of death and war, because ultimately people filled with love and egotism and false pride and the other kinds of things are going to bring war and death upon themselves. And this is, of course, is what we see today. Reagan has no love, no righteous love. Gorbachev has no righteous love. People with righteous love cannot make guns and weapons that threaten to destroy the whole of the human race. These weapons come out of what? Hate, fear, anger, pride, resentment, and the other kinds of things. So then, when we express hatred and hostility, we are expressing the hate instinct. And when you see then that death instinct, the hate instinct being expressed, you see then ultimately it leads to the destruction of something. It can lead to the destruction of the buildings you live in. You hate the landlord. You hate the people who live in it. You hate yourself, and then you destroy the buildings around you, destroy the people around you. Anything that gets your neighbor's goat, you do. You like to see them upset. You like to blow their cool. You like to do things to them out of this instinct. Well, some of us can take hate that is expressed against our enemies. So, hey, they deserve whatever they get, right? And they deserve death, or they deserve the pain that we put on them. But you know, there's one thing peculiar about the hate instinct and the death instinct. It's no respecter of persons. Your own death instinct can turn around against you as an individual. You not only can hate other people, but you can what? Hate yourself. And that hatred that destroys other people, that pains other people, that kills other people, that same hatred, when it's curved around toward you, it's not going to stop doing it, is it? It's going to do the same thing to you. It's going to turn right back around into self-destruction, suicide. In some instances, we say the person that commits suicide is the individual who really wanted to kill somebody else. But for some reason, they lacked the courage, or they didn't quite know who they wanted to kill, or what have you, and ultimately they turned then that instinct upon themselves. Hate then leads to self-alienation and self-destruction. It leads to depression. You know, when you're depressed, you talk about yourself. I'm no good. I'm a low so-and-so. I don't deserve to live. I'm worthless. The same kind of thing that you tell another person when you hate them. You're low. You're this. You're a dirty dog. So forth. When you're in depression, often you'll do what? Turn it right around on yourself. I don't deserve to live. When you hate somebody else, you say, you don't deserve to live, I'm going to kill you. Often then, when you're into self-hatred, you tell yourself the same thing. I hate myself. I don't deserve it. I could just die. I wish I would die. And often people will proceed to die and to kill themselves. It leads then to descendants, where the love instinct leads to transcendence and moving beyond the self. Often then the hate instinct moves to descendants and going into oneself to decadence. Hatred leads, it has its euphoria, but it's an unnatural euphoria. That is, you're going to get your kicks not from self-love and the loving of others, but from trying to deal with your own self-hatred, trying to escape your own self-hatred. You can only feel good when you've hurt somebody. You can only feel good when you've slandered someone, when you cut someone down, embarrassed them, conquered them, beat them in some kind of way. So you have some people, they get a euphoria from hate, but it is a euphoria that leads either to the destruction of themselves or the destruction of someone else. Or in dealing with that euphoria, then they have to go into drugs and alcohols and the other kinds of things as a way of getting a good feeling one way or the other, because hatred is not a good feeling, whether it's expressed outward ultimately or inward. It leads to sadism, the desire to hurt someone else and then get a pleasure from seeing them hurt. You have some people we call sadists, right? Whose only pleasure and sexual pleasure is putting someone else in pain. Often the rapist does not really want sex from the woman. And sometimes with the rapist you can say, well, here it is, you can have all you want. And at that point he loses his interest. He wants you to what? Struggle and fight, and he wants to degrade you and hurt you. And it's only through the degrading of his victim and hurting the victim and forcing the victim against their will and seeing the victim in pain that he gets his climax or gets his sexual jollies, you see. And this is what the sadist is about. A person filled with hate is often a person who can only get pleasure through hurting in one form or another. Masochism is also in there. The individual who can only get some pleasure from being hurt, from being dominated, from being ruled, from being degraded in some form or another. And you have places in the village where masochists hang out, waiting for someone to come along and treat them like a dog for the night, so that they can get at some kind of sexual pleasure. It's a pathetic kind of situation. A lot of this hatred comes out. A lot of this pleasure comes from enslavement. Now let's look then at the kind of love, as we said earlier, that comes from hate. We said nasty people love. Oh, they get all these great feelings we talk about in the records. And they go for trying to hook into someone and get someone to love them only. And they experience this great love. But, ladies and gentlemen, it is not enough to love. The love must be based on the right foundation. One of the reasons why so many marriages are falling apart today, even though the people, when you see them on their wedding day, they say they're getting married because they love each other, is because they love each other for the wrong reason. It is not enough for you to have a feeling of love, to be caught up in the cuteness of some boy, or to be caught up in how sweet he is, or to be caught up in how you can't get him out of your mind, how he makes you feel, how his touch just makes you go off all over. It's not enough. That's not enough. You cannot base a family or long-term relationship on that kind of love. You cannot base having children on that kind of love, you see. You must stand back and look and see upon what kind of love, on what kind of roots that love is growing from. And you may note then that that love is growing out of hate, that love is growing out of resentment, that it's growing out of an unhealthy situation. And even though you have this great feeling and this great longing and this great need, those feelings and those longings and those needs will ultimately destroy the one you love and destroy the children that you claim to love. Because a love that flows out of hatred is a love that's ultimately selfish and self-centered. Is a love that ultimately does not give the other person humanity and does not recognize them as an individual. This kind of love is a love where you love yourself, but you can only love yourself at the expense of destroying the ones you love, only at reducing them in some form or another. Love that comes out of hate is a love where you're going to love somebody who maintains you in your self-destructiveness. What did we say earlier? When you hate and you hate yourself, you also engage in self-destructiveness. Now, the people that you fall in love with will often be the people who help you maintain your self-destructive nature. You love them because they help you what? Destroy yourself. Oh, I go with her because she's hip. You know, she smokes like me. You see, she shoots heroin like I do. I love her for that reason. I can't stand these straight people who don't smoke. I can't be around these people who don't shoot heroin. I can't be around